All right, we'll get started. We have a lot to cover today. So we have talked about getting your head in the game, your role as a manager, managing from the middle. And today we're going to talk about understanding yourself and others. So fun, a lot more reflection. All right, I want to remind everyone to please make sure to download or print your workbook if you can, or if you haven't already done so. We will be taking a lot of time to work through with the workbook, and you could also keep it as a resource. So please make sure you have it available. Also, just a little reminder, please be present. Close out any screens that may be distracting you. Mute your phone if you have to for a little bit, and then make sure we turn on our cameras if we can, if the connection allows. Okay. So we're going to start off real quick in the chat. If you can put in the chat, what are some things that motivate you at work? Don't be shy. We're just starting off easy on a Monday on the chat. What are some things that motivate you? Seeing results, Deborah. Thank you for starting us off. Automation. Okay, cool. Interesting conversations. What I'm doing has impact, coworkers, good friendships, knowing and seeing the impact of having on the lives of others. Yep. Working with a team, objectivity, completing deliverables, helping others, working with a great team. Awesome. Now in the chat, I want you to tell me what may drive you to leave your organization and go to somewhere else. Poor management. Yes, that's a big one. Toxic relationships, lack of action, lack of goals, lack of results and clear strategy, toxic work environment, lack of appreciation, poor management. When my input is not valued, yes, lack of structure, lack of trust, which I've been talking about a lot lately. Management, not listening or making appropriate changes, political instability. Yes, perfect. So one of the things we're going to explore today, one of the objectives is what motivates us as managers, and then also how to be an effective listener, because that goes together, right? That motivation, that understanding is tied to effective listening. And then we're going to also determine what is feedback and why it's important, and when and how to give feedback, which some of us may or may not be comfortable with, but we'll definitely talk about it and practice giving feedback. So we have a lot to do today. Wonderful. Thank you. Structure that has not clear enough. Yes. Perfect. So we are going to talk about, let me share my screen real quick. So we're going to talk about the Herzberg hygiene model, which is the Herzberg's theory of motivation. So in this, this is a surprising survey that was done 50 years ago. And what the study did was, it was done in the 1950s in Pittsburgh, and it was mostly around engineers and accountants. So Herzberg was able to identify motivators that seemed to have a potential to cause long-lasting satisfaction in the workplace, and he called those motivating factors. So what causes an employee to work harder? What causes them to stay at a job? So they're found within the actual job itself, right? Their achievement, recognition, the work itself, responsibility, advancement, growth. And then he also identified factors with a potential to cause dissatisfaction if they were not there, or they were not properly administered, or they had a good structure. Like they were not good company policies, there's lack of strong supervision, the working relationships, a lot of you mentioned toxic working relationship, lack of good management, the conditions are not appropriate conditions to what it's important to you, right? Not a lot of flexibility, unable to remote from home, work from home, time off, adequate amount of time off that some of us are looking for. You're not compensated properly, or it's unstable. So those are the factors that he called hygiene factors, that if they're not present, the actual job itself or surround the job, you're not motivated and will likely leave a job. So again, this was designed in the 1950s in corporate America. And what's interesting is that it's still similar to what we see today, regardless of the sector, nonprofit, international development, the private sector. So again, these were accountants and engineers looking for these factors to have motivation, and also things that dissatisfy them about the work. And we can still say that this is true today. So individuals at their core want the same things, right, out of their workplace. So we're going to use the annotate real quick. And I just want you to use the little stamps and just put a stamp of the factors that motivate you. Or what are some things that you prioritize? So what is the most important thing to you out of this list? The work. Yeah, most of us, actually all of us probably, because we're in this nonprofit space, are very mission-driven individuals that we really like to impact and help others. So once you've put what motivates you, don't forget the other side. Working conditions are important for many of us. We're not happy where we work. We will probably not stay there, even if we love what we do. So to increase the motivation of your team by ensuring that the hygiene factors are not causing dissatisfaction, you need to know your team. You also need to know yourself and what could or may be impacting your own motivation. And again, things fluctuate. We talked about family being a priority, so flexibility may be something that we're looking for during that period of time, or we're just so focused on creating that impact and change, being innovative in the work that we're doing and the lives that we impact. So just know where you're at and what is important for you from that job. Okay? Some people want to supervise, some people don't want to supervise. So don't go for jobs that require you to manage a team if that's not what you're interested in, right? So know what your strengths are, and know what keeps you engaged and feeling fulfilled at work. That's very important. Okay. Awesome. Thank you everyone for sharing with us. I'm sure no one had a hard time figuring this one out this morning. Everybody was like, we're ready. Let's do this. Great. So now we are going to get in our groups. We're going to get in groups of about 3 for about 6 minutes. And in your groups, I want you to discuss a time where you were motivated or were unmotivated at work. And what role did your manager play at that time in that situation? Okay. Any questions so far? Hold on, Felix has a question. Are these categories by level of impact they have on employee motivation? No, they're not categorized from lowest to highest. It's just, this is just a plain list. And I'm sure we can add to this, right? Depending on who you ask and depending, like we even saw some, if there's a field staff team member versus a headquarters team member, the list of hygiene factors may also be different as far as like stability, conditions in country that may be different if we're working in some countries that there's a lot of turmoil or unstable. So this list is just, they're not in any specific category. Great question, Felix. All right, so when Marinda gives me the thumbs up, we're gonna break out into groups and you're gonna talk about a time when you were motivated or unmotivated at work and what role did your manager play in that situation. All right, I got the thumbs up. We are ready to go. See you in 6 minutes.
You go.
Great. So we're all back. So we don't have to share your experience unless you're comfortable and you want to share, but So I'm going to open the floor. Does anybody want to share their experience of a time
Yeah,
they were
yes.
motivated? Yes, Philomena, please.
Yeah, so I shared with my team how excited I was one time. Somebody told a lie on me to my supervisor. And then my supervisor said, I don't think that person I know would do that, right? So she didn't even ask me. She just said, no, I don't believe that because I know who I work with. And it took a couple of months when my boss and I were chatting, and she was like, oh, do you know this person told me this? And I told them no. And truly, it was not true. And I was like, oh my goodness, this person so much knows me and he trusts me because I wouldn't do that. I mean, she's worked with me. And my team, we also discussed about the fact that sometimes at the workplace, you contribute so much to a project, and some people who get to present take it as theirs. And then everybody's like, yeah, but it's not their work, maybe 20%.
Yeah. You see the importance of just trust, right? And you feeling supported by your team or your supervisor is so important. It really is. It changes just your whole outlook and how you feel about being, at that job. So just remember that, managers really do play a big role in an employee's level of satisfaction in the workplace. I mean, I can honestly tell you, I've left at least 2 jobs in my career because of poor support by a manager that were my direct supervisor. And it was horrible because I loved the job. I really liked what I was doing, but I just couldn't take the management style of the supervisor, their lack of trust and support. And another case was the lack of leadership and vision of the organization, and unable to communicate and bring us all together as a team. And even though we were a small team, so it has an impact. But that also made me realize what kind of manager I wanted to be for my future teams, right? So we learn both from the good supervisory experiences that we've had and the bad ones. So it's all good at the end, right? Because it shapes us as well. Anybody else want to share a situation? Just want to make sure we have that open space if anybody does want to share. All right. So at the core of the relationship we have with our supervisors and what motivates us, it's really also the active listening piece, right? We want to make sure we feel heard, we feel seen, that we feel like people know us and have our backs, right? Or that we're actually part of this team that we're working in. So we're going to do a little exercise. By the way, I always say this, but this is really one of my favorite exercises out of this whole workshop. We are going to practice. We're actually going to see what listening can sometimes feel like. So I'm going to give you very clear instructions. And this is an opportunity for you to practice your active listening right now. So Marinda is going to copy a link on the chat. No one should open it. That's number one. Do not open that link. Let's control ourselves there. You're going to get into groups of 2. When you get into the groups of 2, you're going to decide who will be person A and who will be person B. Only person A will open the link. So we're having trust here and we're giving you instructions. Person B does not open the link. Okay. Person B is going to get a piece of paper and pen or pencil, and then is going to listen carefully and draw the picture that person A is describing to you. So person A is going to describe the picture clearly without showing it to your partner. And the goal is for you to describe the picture so that the person B can draw it themselves. There's no questions to be asked. So no asking questions, nothing clarifying. And you have 5 minutes. So we may not have a lot of time for the chit chat. How was your weekend? Hello. But we might need to just get down to business. Okay. And then person B is going to show person A the product of the active listening. And then we'll come back and show each other as well. Okay. Everybody good? Awesome. Love it. So Marinda's going to give me the thumbs up and we're going to get this party started. Great. We will see you in 5 minutes.
There you go.
So I want to see, before we see everybody's drawing, Let's do a little work first. So who wants to share, how did it go for them? And then tell us what you were, if you were the drawer, you were the person that giving instructions. And tell me something that maybe was challenging. All right, Stella.
Sure.
I think
I
I
can.
can pretty
Oh,
well.
it's gonna be Stella and then Angela. Give me one second, Angela.
fine.
Okay, go ahead, Stella.
I think our team did pretty well, I have to say. We actually got it very, very close to like the original drawing.
And you were giving the instructions or you were the drawer?
I was giving the instructions.
Should I show
Okay.
it?
Yeah, I think Sarah.
Yes,
should
you
do
can
that.
show it.
Okay, this is what we had.
Oh,
This is very good instructions.
great.
I think the biggest challenge was actually describing the chimney without using the word chimney.
Yeah.
I was having some trouble describing like what that was on top of the triangle.
That is awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. Angela.
I must say I'm not a good listener. I just told Alison, you should have told me it's a house, and I figure out what kind of house it is. But okay, I can show you what we eventually got.
Okay. We have a roof.
Yes, we have a roof.
We have a structure.
We have windows. We have a door.
That's awesome.
Wow,
I think,
interesting.
yeah, no, thank you so much. And that's one of the things, like something so simple and we get in our own way, right? So I think, Mary, you had your hand up. And then Felix.
Yes, I did. So I was person A, and it was interesting in terms of just describing what it was, and we got it quite fast. But something that I'm noting from here is that when I was giving instructions, I don't think I described the chimney. I focused more on the house.
That chimney.
So, yes, so my partner was able to get the house, but in hindsight, I'm getting to see that I forgot the chimney. So the instructions was possibly not complete instruction. Although we got the house, it was not necessarily complete as the image.
So sometimes it's those details that get us confused, or we just don't know how to say it, right? So awesome. That chimney got a few of you. That was interesting. Awesome. Thank you, Mary. All right, Felix and then Alexis. Wow, Felix, you have like tiles on your roof? That is awesome. Was that part of the instruction or was that your extra flair?
Yes, my personnel was very clear. I didn't even have to ask her to apply for anything, but I think somehow we missed on the chimney as well. But it was a good experience.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Alexis?
Thanks. I wanted to give Brian some credit. He was the person who had to describe the building, and we also came up with a building. I'll share it with you if you can see it. But he did a good job on it, and it was more like a story. So it was like the construction of the house that got me there, and it got me there really quickly. And I found that really interesting, just the way that we process stuff. So we started with the digging in the ground and creating a foundation, and then like what the house, like what it does, like it opens things. And so it was just a unique way to describe it rather than, and what I told him is I think I probably would have described shapes, and then there probably would have been shapes all over the paper, but not good. So I think it's just a unique way to describe things that might be more or easier for people to adopt, right, or listen to.
Right. I mean, and then you think about it, it's a house, right? This is the way we learned how to draw a house when we were kids, a square, a triangle, but yet it's so hard when we get to be adults where you're like, what? So real quick before I go to Deborah, Philomena, I am so sorry that your partner wasn't able to join you. If that ever happens again to any of you, please come back to the main room and we will quickly reassign you. Okay, I apologize, Philomena, for that little mishap. Okay, perfect. Go ahead, Deborah.
So I was actually going to take it in a slightly different direction, that I found it easier that it was something that was recognizable. So when she started, like, I was so worried. I'm like, okay, this is going to be something complex because I don't know how to draw. But she started describing it. I'm like, okay, I can draw. And she did an amazing job. Okay, draw a triangle. Okay, now you're going to draw a square under the triangle. It connects to, and like, she did such an amazing job describing it. I recognized what the overall vision she was having was. And my concern was able to be more on the details, like, okay, where do I put the windows? Where do I put the chimney? Without her saying those words, I knew that that's where she was headed with what she was doing. I felt that that helped rather than some imaginary beast that existed only in her mind that I would have had to like ask 20 bazillion questions. At least it was something recognizable. But
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you for sharing that. And then Emily says, I think because the picture was so simple, it almost made it harder to describe. Interesting, Emily. Do you want to?
I was also going to add, while this was a listening activity, I find it really interesting hearing how people described it. Like some people just did shapes, whereas for me, I started by saying, you know, this is something that people live in. It's not an apartment. It's not a connected thing. You know, you could have a yard, and then other people just go with shapes or even like the development of the house. So while it's interesting that that it was a listening exercise, it's more interesting how people even describe it to begin with.
Yeah, and it's hard sometimes, right? When you really realize someone is dependent on you to carry out or complete a task, right? And sometimes we don't think about that. And let's be honest, because we're just so focused or don't have time. And that's how you have to realize which staff or team member needs what from you. And that's where you go from the situational leadership, right? The coaching, the being very direct, or the being very hands-on. So that's where you move through that spectrum and understanding who your team is, right? But we need that time to be intentional about our interactions. So I love that. And, you know, also at the end of the day too, we can't expect to actively listen 100% of the time. It's hard. Honestly, it just is. Some people just don't even like the detail, but detail is important. Some people don't only want the detail. They just don't want the end result, right? Or want both. And it's hard. We have a lot going on personally. There might be a lot of emergencies or priorities happening at work or personally. So it's hard to be so focused sometimes. Go ahead, Binta.
Thanks, Francesca. What I wanted to share is that as much as the exercise was really interesting, I find that the challenge was also the fact that, I mean, we're talking about management, right? So here's someone giving direction, but you were clear about the fact that the other person was not supposed to ask questions. So in real life, this is not what you expect, right? In a work relationship. So that was, I think, interesting.
Right. And that's a great point, because I'm going to just use an example of what happens sometimes that I hear very often. People are like, you know, my boss loves to send me emails on the weekends, and then I feel the pressure to have to answer emails. And then my answer is always like, well, did they tell you you had to answer emails on the weekends? Because if not, it's your own self-imposed pressure and idea and your own expectation, right? And then it creates the cycle. So I always say, go back and ask, what are the expectations, right? Because we get in our own way sometimes. So if you don't explicitly see something in writing that says no, or requires you to do something, or someone tells you to do something, don't assume that you can't, or don't assume that you have to, depending on the situation. Okay. So now I want to see everybody's drawing. Can everybody who was a drawer just put it up to your screen? Let's check them out, since we only got to see a few. Ooh, some of you got a little 3D there. That is awesome. Oh my goodness, those are great. Some were small, some were big, some filled the whole page, some were in the middle. Isn't that interesting how we all were working off the same image, and either we described it differently, we drew it differently. That is awesome. We added extra features like roof tiles or made it 3D, added an extra wall. That's amazing. So temptation to just tell the listener what it was high. So some things are not easy to describe. Correct. Everyone oh, hi, Andrea. No, don't worry. Thank you for joining. You missed a fun exercise, but don't worry, we have more to come. Awesome. So if you also want an icebreaker for your teams, this is a great one. As you start building that cohesiveness within your team, it's fun, but then it also makes them be more aware about how they're communicating, how they're also listening, and it's a great team building and it's fun. So if you want to incorporate that, definitely great resource. So what resource did you use to get the picture? Did you choose one randomly from the internet? This was actually what some of our trainers at Humantum picked as the best one. So, you know, something simple is, I forgot which study they actually used, but it's something very basic and simple that we can all relate to, no matter where you are on the globe, no matter where, you know, what kind of team structure you have. So it's something that everyone can easily translate and do. It's a great question, Deborah. And you have the link, so feel free to incorporate it in your teams. I think you'll be surprised and they'll be surprised how that gets used. So talking about this whole active listening, it's also very important that we are active listeners during the times of difficult conversations or coaching scenarios. That's where you really got to focus and you really got to tune out everything else. And, you know, one of the pictures which I'm going to share with you now on my screen is like what people say is like an iceberg. What they say out loud is what you see above the surface. But what about everything underneath? We may not hear what I want, but we don't hear why they want it, right? What do they mean? What is their true emotions or interests? And most conversations happen at the surface level, in the I want level. So we need to get deep and understand where people are coming from, okay? If we really listen, we can sometimes start to get below the surface to understand more. And that helps us to find out why someone wants what they want, why they act how they act, what their motivations are, and how we can find a convergence of interest, which is key to finding a solution that meets both of our needs. Okay. So let's use an example of the mother that has one orange and she has 2 kids who are fighting over the orange. So all she hears, I need the orange, right, from both of her kids. So what can the mom do? She can cut the orange in half. So one gets half of an orange, the other one gets the other. She could say no one gets an orange, or she just lets them fight it out, right? Survival of the fittest, whoever can get to it first. So what about asking the kids though? What do you want? Or why do you want the orange? Right? It turns out the one kid eats the orange rind, the skin of the orange, to bake a cake. And then the other child wants to make orange juice. So if she cuts the orange in half, then no one gets enough of what they want. So again, all she's hearing is I want the orange, is what you hear on the surface. And if you're not careful, what you hear on the surface can trigger emotions because of unfiltered listening, anger, right? Frustration. Why can't you just share the orange? That's what the mom would see, right? Why can't you just share the orange? Figure it out. But yet what is underneath the surface are motivations, the why. So when you try to understand why someone wants something, you can come close to finding some common ground so that you can start finding a solution, so that you can help them achieve something, whatever it is that they need from you at that time. So let's think real quick. What we're seeing on the slide is the steps of that one example was just everything that was here, right? Unfiltered listening is what we start, listening without responding. So just absorb what is being said to you when someone is speaking to you. And it's hard, and we tend to sometimes spend more time forming our response or anticipating what the situation may lead to than actually listening. And we want to come up with solutions and fixes. Usually this happens. I mean, my husband sometimes tells me all the time, I'm a fixer, right? By nature. So he's like, I just wanted to say something. And I'm like, I know, but in my head, I'm already like trying to help you and fix it for you. So sometimes I have to like reel it back in, because that's just the nature of the work that I do. I'm always fixing creative thinking or doing things like that. So sometimes I carry that through to any conversation I have. So then we emphasize with others by sharing our own experiences. So those are all things that hinder us from being able to listen in an unfiltered way. So how do we listen and focus? So listen without responding. So it's consciously stopping what you're trying to hear and trying to put it on through your filter and just really focus on what's being said. So don't think about your expectations, don't think about your opinions, don't think about your experiences, so then you're relating each situation together. You really have to actively hold that back. So dial back that noise in your head and be intentional. Say to yourself, I'm going to listen. I'm not going to add my experiences. I'm going to turn off any judgment or preconceptions. And you have to be actively practicing this, and then eventually it will become something natural. Okay, the second piece is reflecting. So repeat back what you heard. Again, this is hard to do because we have so much noise in our head. We're trying to link things or we're not focused. So our natural response in a difficult conversation is to also be defensive or to not validate the other person's feelings. So we really have to remove all those layers out. So it is important to acknowledge how the other person feels, especially when you're having those challenging conversations with staff or anyone in your team. And the chances are people are frustrated or come out or feel a certain way because they're already not feeling heard. So if you're not actively listening to them, it just perpetuates that feeling of them not feeling like they're being seen or heard. So repeat back what they're saying to you. It would help you process again what is coming in, the information that's coming in, so then that you can go ahead and inquire and ask questions. Okay, so repeat back the words without adding any other layer. No emotions, just matter of fact. If necessary and appropriate, consider being transparent by saying that you want to repeat back what you're hearing because the conversation is important to you and you want to make sure you understand what is being said. So reframe, repeat back the words and emotions that you hear, but with less escalatory language, especially if you're speaking to a staff person or your supervisor and they're really emotional, agitated or frustrated. Repeat back what's being said, but try to limit all that emotion as well so that you can make this more of a constructive conversation. And also don't start doing labeling. Name and validate the other person's emotions without necessarily agreeing with them. So it sounds like you feel angry about, instead of like, oh, you're so right to be upset at so-and-so for doing that, right? It's not productive. So acknowledge their feelings and acknowledge why they might be upset, but you're not agreeing or disagreeing. And that's very important when you're either counseling or coaching your staff member. Okay. The whole point is to de-escalate and make this a very productive and matter-of-fact conversation. The third step is to inquire, ask questions. Why, what is it that made you feel this way? Help me understand what's bothering you, or help me understand why you reacted the way you did during the staff meeting. Okay, sometimes this is hard to do because we are assuming that we know what's going on when in fact we may not know what's going on. So again, actively trying to get to the bottom of a situation and not creating our own scenarios of that situation. Because at the end of the day, we can never really know what someone's experience is like until we ask them. Okay. Avoid leading questions. So when you want to find out what's bothering someone, or what was the cause of something, starting with clearly you don't bothering you. Help me understand. That's what we want to work on. Okay. And the last piece is generate ideas, especially for you judge So final piece of active list to engage the person with the end goal of finding solutions, helping them, but it's all about moving forward. So acknowledging their situation, their feelings, make sure you understand them, and then how do we work together to reach that goal or to help them get that information, and working together to do that. Okay. There's only 4 steps to active listening, but again, it's treating the situation for what it is and giving the time to reflect on what is being said and understanding what is being said. So I know I have asked you to listen to me for quite a little bit, and you're now going to get a chance to practice active listening. So while giving and receiving feedback. So we're going to get to the feedback session. So by a show of hands, for those of you that have your camera on, or not use the emoji, how many of you think that you give enough feedback? I'm going to stop sharing so I could see all of you. How many of you think that you give enough feedback? Raise your hand. Sometimes. So. Okay. How many of you think you get enough feedback about you? Katrina. Oh, still some more. All right. Felix, yes. Okay, perfect. So now what we're going to work on is we're going to be talking about feedback. So, okay, sorry, before we go there was a comment. Felix says requires patience and understanding, especially if the other person is not being very reasonable or patient. Yes, with active listening, it does. You need to kind of like stop judging or labeling someone and just really take the situation for what it is and make sure you understand and acknowledge them. So yes, definitely. Okay. Stella, was that a question or was that just raising your hands to the feedback?
Oh, sorry, I was just raising my hand for the feedback.
Okay, no, that's perfect. I just want to make sure we didn't miss back. Okay, so in the chat, I am going to ask you some questions. So the first question is, what is feedback to you? Just a few words. What is feedback to you? Constructive criticism. Thank you, Stella. So what feedback? What other people feel or think I do well and can improve on. Thank you, Felix. Opinion and comments on what was done, guidance. Thank you, Deborah. Communication, information to help perform better. Sharing what's working well, what areas can be improved, and of course, of action to address those. It also depends on delivery of feedback. Yes, actual guidance. Perfect. Yes. So feedback in context is the process of giving people information about the results of their actions, right? Feedback on performance is an important part of a manager's job. The 90-day probation feedback, the annual feedback for merit increases, but also those check-ins that we're having on how tasks are going are very important. Perfect. The next question I'm going to ask you is, what's the purpose of feedback? Some of you already kind of answered that, combined with what is feedback to you? Improving to understand how others feel. Yeah, so the purpose of feedback is to help people see themselves as others see them, to highlight the nature of individual strengths, their areas of improvement, and contributions as well. So it's also celebrating, not just pointing out areas that need improvement. This provides the basis for learning, so the individuals have the opportunity to do things differently in the future. So for the manager, feedback plays a vital part in maintaining and improving performance standards, that quality, control, and assurance. Some of you already answered this, but why is feedback important? So if you didn't, put that on the chat. So feedback is important because it has the potential to improve the levels of motivation and performance. Okay. Why is it important to some of you? Again, we've already answered some of those questions, but if feedback is avoided or badly handled, it can cause at best a superficial conformity, but an underlying rejection or resentment. That's where you have a passive aggressive, staff person. That's where you have the person that just not engaged or connected at all, will just do what they're supposed to do or do just what they want to do. So they're there physically, but they're not engaged or connected into anything of the work. Right, Sumar. That's why how we deliver feedback is so important. Yes, 100%. So why is feedback difficult? Let's put that in the chat. Why is feedback difficult? People may not like what we say. Yes. Anybody else? Thank you, Deborah. Fear of its reception. Not everyone will appreciate feedback. People may not. Was that? Defensiveness can occur? Yes. People may not see what we see and have a hard time grasping. Yes. And that happens often. Scared of hurting people's feelings. You have to manage egos. Yes. Sometimes we want to protect our biases. Yes. Misunderstanding of the intent. So feedback is difficult because people do not usually enjoy criticizing others to an extent, right? It's constructive criticism. It's not just critiquing them. It's often difficult to accept it without becoming defensive. So there's often a fear that it might result in an argument or someone becoming upset. And giving and receiving praise is often just as uncomfortable for people, but it's possible to learn to be better at giving feedback. And by remembering a few guidelines that we're going to talk about now. Okay. Feedback is very important, especially as managers. I can't stress that enough. No matter how uncomfortable the situation is. And what happens a lot is managing people's expectations. So they think they're performing at a high level, but when they're really not, right? So how do you help with those conversations? So we'll talk through that right now. So how do we give feedback? How do you give feedback to your team members? Let's put that last question in the chat. How do you give feedback? Written, on face-to-face, or face-to-face? Perfect. Start with a positive and then go into what needs to improve through one-on-ones. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Sumar. Factual considered face-to-face. I try to give it as soon as possible. Face-to-face, yes. So feedback is the most successful when the receiver understands it, accepts it, and can act upon it. And this can be achieved by by acknowledging that the intention is to be helpful and not hurtful. Okay. It includes a positive reinforcement of the strengths. So starting out with that positive, it describes the actual behavior, not the individual person, personality, or attitudes. So if a staff member answered incorrectly or did not provide the customer service level that you would expect them to another colleague, then you talk about that situation, right? It's the behavior or the action that was taken. It concentrates on areas the receiver can control and do something about. It's specific, using examples to illustrate what the issue was, avoid generalizing anything. It describes but does not judge, and it concentrates on the actions. It avoids presenting opinions as if they're facts. So I get the impression that you're not interested in your work anymore. That's not a fact, right? Or you've lost interest in your work. The quality of your work has gone down. Like, just avoid presenting opinions. It doesn't give too much information. Overloading may get things off your chest, but it won't help them and you won't achieve your objective. So the timing of the feedback, it's also very important. If people are very emotional, it was an emotional situation, nothing's going to come through from like a feedback perspective. Acknowledge how they feel, ask them how they're feeling as well. If they can't, ask what happened. If it just seems like too much, then let's say, you know what, let's come back to it tomorrow. Why don't you take some time to just process and calm down? And then we'll have a conversation the next day or later the afternoon, depending on the situation. Okay. And then feedback is supposed to be constructive. So looking forward and you reinforcing that. We're looking forward to helping a situation or help you grow within the organization. What is it that we're trying to achieve? So I know we already kind of tapped into this when to give feedback, but again, ideally feedback should be given immediately. The nearer to the event, the better, to recall the circumstances, to recall the information, and the more concrete the information which you can build on. Okay. Again, exceptions are if there's a very emotional or intense situation that requires everyone to just acknowledge their feelings and calm down a little bit before you have that conversation. And when a specified period has been agreed, so telling them we'll come back to this tomorrow, that's part of where you do want to wait on giving the feedback. Okay. So feedback should not be stored for the annual appraisal or the end of the probationary period. So don't wait to take out that list you've been waiting for all year. Okay. So a good practice is to have check-ins and discuss how things are going. What does your staff need from you? What feedback do you have for them? But it works both ways. Like, what do they need from you? Is there anything else you can support them with? And also, this is what you're seeing and how you can help. So by the time the performance review happens, no one is surprised. All these conversations have been had. Again, the good conversations, also what's working, just as important as what needs areas of improvement. They both are important all year round. Because that also gives staff like security that they're doing a good job and that there won't be any surprises about people being let go or extending probationary periods, not getting a merit increase or getting a merit increase, getting a promotion. They know, and it gives them that security at work. And especially now with remote and hybrid work, you have to find a balance of how to carry out these feedback sessions. Some staff require more frequent check-ins. Some once a month is perfectly fine. Whatever works for your team and that person in your team is the approach you need to take. Okay. Any questions so far about feedback? Yes, Binta.
Yes, I mean, this is not really a question, but maybe sharing how I feel about feedback in general. I think the best time when I'm kind of willing to receive a feedback is when I have in front of me someone who is maybe, asking me first how I felt about the situation or whatever we're about to discuss, kind of just factoring in the, how I felt before giving me the feedback. Just being engaged and yeah.
Yes, and then, but it's all, I love how you say, this is how I like feedback, right? But this is good because that's, right, what works for you. So you're gonna also take the time to either follow the same approach because that's what you know and you're comfortable with, or try to find out how staff best receive feedback. Okay, no matter how the feedback is, if it's on person or one-on-one, always follow up with an email or some type of written communication. That's honestly a best practice. Some of us are in that meeting. We all know how hard it is to actively listen, and there might be a lot going on, our emotions, whatever the case may be. Even if you're telling them they're going to get a promotion and you're planning out their career path, whatever it is, follow up with something in writing with bullet points of what was discussed so that there's no room for misinterpreting or misunderstanding the conversation. Okay. So that's just a little sidebar there. Okay. So we like to include this onion model because I like to show you how the layers of people are, right? So we're all like onions, to be honest with you. You slice us through the center, and like an onion, we have many layers. At the very center is our personality, which is very change resistant. It's gonna be hard to change someone's personality, right? If you have a glass empty or glass half full person, it's gonna be really hard to change that. But their attitudes are made up of all those formative influences and are also very change resistant, but less so than the personality. So then we start at the outer layer, the behaviors, the wardrobe, your clothes, right? The way I behave at work, with family, with friends, in social groups and clubs or professional organizations. I can change my behavior like my clothes. So this is the most open to change and to the feedback, is to change that behavior. That's why we focus on behavior when we're doing feedback. We don't focus on personality or the attitude, we focus on behavior. So it's important that the area in which you give feedback always focuses on that behavior, that situation, that scenario. And then consider aligning behavioral feedback to organizational values and behavioral competencies. Okay. Some of you may remember some organizations are very upfront, right? And they say, remember, no matter what, you're always representing the organization. So behave accordingly. Don't do anything that you would not be proud of if it were on the front page of the newspaper, because it could impact or have consequences with your employment. So again, it's about that behavior. And then with behavior changes, then you can change the attitude, right? And then, I mean, it's going to be really hard to change personality, but at least you can get some of those attitudes change. So if you have someone that's very quiet and does not participate at meetings, you can work with them to change that behavior, ask them questions, and be more intentional about how you engage them. And then eventually that would help them feel comfortable and change the attitude towards how they participate in meetings. They may not go with you to happy hour later and hang out with you, right? And be very social, right? I should stop saying happy hour, right? No, like, you know, company gatherings or in the kitchen for lunch or celebrating birthdays, right? In the kitchen. But you will at least start feeling them, that they're part of the team, that you want to include them, you welcome their feedback. And so therefore it changes at least how they perceive their contribution and therefore their attitude. Okay. So it's all connected. Awesome. So the next little model I want to show you is the situational behavioral impact model. It's the SBI model. So at the Center for Creative Leadership created this SBI model to find out the intention behind the action someone took. Instead of us thinking we know why someone acted a certain way, this kind of helps us just focus on the matter of fact. So it's a very simple and direct approach. I'm sure most of us already do this. Now we know it as a model, right? And you clarify the situation, describe the specific behavior observed, and explain the impact their behavior had. It's very simple. And that's pretty much how most of us get feedback now anyway. But now you know it's a model. So for example, there's a situation during a staff meeting. A staff person was rude when someone spoke about, I'm going to say this, everybody's favorite topic, travel reimbursements, right? So the finance person was rude to a staff member when during a staff meeting, there were conversations about travel reimbursements. So the impact was, I can say, I felt that it was an appropriate way to speak to others, or it seemed like your tone was taken harsh by the person based on their reaction. So that's the impact. But tell me what was going on that made you react this way. So now I'm asking them, I observed this is what happened, right? The situation, the impact it had. What was your intent? The person can, which actually had this happen to me, my finance assistant was telling us that they were very frustrated because no one he kept having one-on-one conversations about how to properly fill out the travel reimbursement forms, but people were still submitting them wrong. So when it got to the staff meeting where people are complaining why things are taking so long, they were really frustrated and reacted that way in the middle of a staff meeting with our director present. And I was just like, oh, no, that's not what we do. So again, what was the issue? So then I had to go back and kind of like smooth it kind of over a little bit after I knew what the situation was. But again, we want to know the intent. Something's always brewing underneath that we just don't know. Okay. So again, this model is great for coaching on performance. And it's also really helpful if you're training someone. So it can be used to give positive feedback as well as areas of improvement. I don't like saying negative feedback, but areas of improvement or areas to strengthen. Okay. So now we are going to have a little fun and we are going to practice giving and receiving feedback. We're going to take about 15 minutes. We're going to get in groups of 3. So the first person will be the person giving the feedback, and we'll choose from the 2 scenarios that we're going to talk about that are also in your workbook, and identify and describe an individual and the context for the feedback, and goes on to verbalize and practice giving the feedback. So person 1 will be the person giving the feedback. Person 2 will put themselves in the individual shoes from that scenario on how you will respond to the feedback. And person 3 will be observing the interaction and making observations on how the feedback was given and received. Okay. So the first scenario, Marinda just put it in the chat. No, she put the instructions on the chat. So again, person 1 gives the feedback based on the scenario identified. Person 2 receives the feedback based on the scenario you choose. And person 3 is observing and taking notes on that interaction and giving feedback to persons 1 and 2. Okay. So the first scenario is your boss is not giving you definitive answers on the timeline for your deliverables, and it's making it difficult to move forward on your project. So focus here on managing upwards. Okay. The second scenario, a staff member who reports to you is increasingly demonstrating a lack of motivation and a slight attitude about work responsibilities. So much so that they're beginning to get complaints from other members of the staff. So here, focus on managing your staff member. I think everyone is in groups of 3, right, Marinda?
No, there's 2 groups of 4.
Okay, if we have, for the groups of 4s, there will be 2 observers. Okay, so if you're in a group of 4, you will have 2 observers, 1 person giving feedback, 1 person receiving feedback. Okay. Great, so when Marinda gives me the thumbs up, we are going to have, we're gonna have 12 minutes, so we have some time to debrief after. So we're gonna have 12 minutes. Sorry, Marinda, I just made that quick change on you.
Perfect.
All right, everybody, we will see you shortly.
Here you go.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Who wants to share how they feel about that exercise? So how did it feel to say certain words? Were you comfortable? Were you uncomfortable? What was different if you got to do both receiving and giving feedback or observing, depending on the role that you had? Don't be shy. We're almost done. Go ahead, Jeanette. And then Kelly.
Yeah, so we took scenario B, and like I was the one receiving feedback, and the one giving feedback got to a point and said, interesting, because your roles and the reason you are not meeting timelines, say for maybe report writing, is because your role and your deliverables are also tied to other people's role in it. So it may not be entirely the reason it may not entirely be your making for not meeting deliverables. And so our conclusion was every time we give feedback, it would be important to be solution oriented and go in with an open mind and try to understand and be empathetic to fully understand where the other colleagues are. Then you could then work towards a solution. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, remember, we can never be so high up in an organization that we're still not connected to the teams that we lead. Because then we can't relate, right? And then we're just dictating what we want done. All right, awesome. Kelly.
Yeah, so I was the person who gave feedback in my group for scenario A. And I think what helped for me is I'm somebody who doesn't like uncomfortable conversations for the most part. So what helped me is like going into it, treating it like it wasn't a confrontation, because I feel like sometimes giving feedback can very much feel like a confrontation, and you almost go into that with that mindset. And so I tried to work on the framing of the situation, and while not ignoring like the fact that I was giving this person feedback on something that I felt they needed to do better or differently, I think kind of approaching it from that perspective kind of helps with your even like emotional kind of delivery too.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Remember, this is all constructive. We're all helping each other, right? You may have a little more experience, which is what you're trying to share and convey to your team. Or there's something that you're also learning from them. So don't think of this as a confrontational situation. I'm not gonna lie, there might be situations that it will be uncomfortable, like you really have to discipline someone or let someone go because of performance. And that is really hard because sometimes they don't even realize that they're not performing to the level that it's expected for them. So I'm not saying that it's gonna be like non-confrontational, but most of those don't happen often. Most of them is just really giving and receiving feedback so that we can continue to all work together and grow as a team. Okay, anybody else want to share? Okay, so real quick, I know we have a minute to go. So I'm going to share my screen and we're just going to summarize everything that we've gone through. So giving the right feedback is try to make it a positive experience. Like Kelly was saying, be timely, make it regular, prepare your comments, use I statements, limit your focus. So don't have it be an information dump in one session, prioritize the items you want to cover, talk about positives just as much as areas of improvement, and follow up. Okay. When you're receiving the feedback, stop your initial reaction. Relax and breathe deeply, listen actively, know your limits. If the conversation is going in a whole different direction than you would like it to go, it becomes a very negative. You could say, I hear you, I understand, but this is getting a little bit too much for me. Can we please continue it later? Or can we continue it tomorrow? Yeah, those situations don't happen often, but they happen. Exercise your option to accept, reject, or put on hold what is being said to you. Express appreciation if you feel it. If someone's giving you the feedback and you're like, wow, thank you so much, right? So acknowledge what was said, accept the feedback, make a plan to address the situation or behavior, recommit to improving the behavior or situation. Giving feedback is good because it helps clarify expectations and responsibilities, as well as build good rapport so that you can have honest and open conversations. All right, I know we covered a lot today. So if before we leave, you can write on the chat one thing that you learned before you leave us, and we will reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Yes, Deborah, the whole thing was very anxiety producing. Yes. So one thing that you have learned, and once you put that in the chat for me, then I will see you tomorrow. You know, we covered a lot. It could even be something you learned about yourself. Communicate peacefully. I have the right to reject, accept, and put on hold. Yes, you do, Deborah. The steps to active listening was very helpful. Yes, thank you, Brian. Make sure to be appreciative. Yes. The steps, asking questions to understand, how to give feedback, emphasize the impact their interactions will have on the project organization. Yeah, always link it up to the organizational goals and your team goals. Importance of timing of feedback. Yes. Yes, plan your feedback. A little thank you goes a long way. Yes, Sarah. Yes, you can sandwich it up, positive, negative, positive again, so it doesn't seem so negative all the time. But yes, we are on that. All right, everyone. Thank you all so much. We will see you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.